My sister made my life miserable for years, until I finally cut her off and watched her world crumble. And then I grew up in the shadow of my older sister, Madison. She was everything I wasn't: beautiful, charming, the kind of person who could walk into a room and have everyone's attention without even trying. She was 3 years older than me, but it felt like she lived in a world I could never be part of. Our parents adored her. She was their pride and joy, the one they always talked about, the one they bragged about at every family gathering. And me? I was the awkward little sister they barely noticed unless it was to compare me to Madison. I wasn't pretty like her, not funny or outgoing, just the quiet one who read too much and never quite fit in. Whenever people asked about me, the answer was always the same. "Oh, Ashley? She's smart." As if that was the only thing worth mentioning, a polite way of saying I wasn't special in any other way. Madison didn't just enjoy being the favorite. She made sure I knew it every chance she got. At home, at school, even online, she found ways to make me feel small. She'd make jokes about my weight, my clothes, how I'd probably never get a boyfriend looking the way I did. She loved posting little funny stories about how socially awkward I was, always followed by a casual LOL, just sister things. And if I ever dared to say I didn't like it, our parents would just wave it off, telling me I was too sensitive, that Madison was just joking and I needed to lighten up. They loved telling the story of the time I tripped in front of Madison's friends when I was 14 and how she laughed so hard she cried. According to them, it was hilarious. According to me, it was another moment I wished I could disappear. The night everything changed was when I was 18. It was at a fancy wedding our family was invited to, one of those events where everyone is trying to impress each other. I had finally worked up the courage to wear something that made me feel good instead of trying to blend into the background. I wasn't the prettiest girl there, not even close, but for once, I felt comfortable in my own skin. Then Madison saw me, loud enough for the whole table to hear. She laughed and said I looked like I was trying way too hard. She joked about how she should have helped me pick something more flattering and how brave I was for wearing heels with my short, chubby legs. People laughed, some awkwardly, some genuinely amused, and all I wanted to do was crawl under the table. That was the moment I decided I was done. Done being the joke. Done being Madison's punchline. I didn't say anything that night, but something in me shifted. After that, I threw myself into changing everything. Not because I wanted to be like Madison, but because I wanted to be someone she couldn't tear down anymore. I lost weight, not to be skinny, but to feel strong and capable in my own body. I worked on my confidence, my style, the way I carried myself. I pushed myself in school, built a network, and carved out a career in marketing that I loved. By my mid-20s, I was thriving. I had a high-paying job, a great circle of friends, and a life I had built entirely on my own terms. People respected me, not because of who I was related to, but because of who I had become. Meanwhile, Madison's perfect life started to crack. She had coasted through everything on charm and good looks, never bothering to develop any real skills. She married young to a guy with money, but their relationship was a disaster, and by the time I was hitting my stride, she was watching her marriage fall apart and struggling to keep up the image she had always projected. Even then, our parents treated her like the victim. They made excuses for her mistakes, tiptoed around her, and expected me to do the same. "She's going through a hard time," they'd say. "She needs support," as if she had ever supported me. I hadn't seen Madison in years when we finally ran into each other at a professional event. I was there with colleagues. She was there trying to switch careers after realizing her charm wasn't enough to land a stable job. The moment she saw me, her eyes widened. For the first time, she had to acknowledge that I wasn't the awkward little sister she could ignore anymore. A few days later, she reached out. At first, it was friendly, almost nostalgic, but it didn't take long for the real reason to come out. She was struggling to find work and thought that maybe, since I was so successful now, I could help her out. I didn't say no right away. I asked her what she had done to improve her situation. Had she taken any courses, updated her skills, applied to jobs properly? Her answer was a list of excuses. The industry was unfair. People only hired based on connections. She was just in a rough patch and needed a foot in the door. And of course, she played the family card. We're sisters. Isn't that what family does? I wasn't surprised when our parents got involved next. Suddenly, I was the villain for not handing Madison opportunities on a silver platter. The same parents who told me to toughen up when I was struggling now expected me to fix Madison's life without question. Their guilt trips didn't work on me anymore, but part of me wondered, should I be the bigger person? Should I use this as a chance to finally change the dynamic between us? I wasn't sure yet, but one thing was clear. Madison wasn't used to facing consequences, and maybe it was time she did. The calls started the next day. First, it was my mom, her voice dripping with disappointment, the kind she used when she wanted me to feel guilty but still seem like the victim. She told me Madison had explained everything, how I was refusing to help, shutting out family when they needed me most. I barely got a word in before she launched into the lecture. Family isn't about keeping score, Ashley. You're being cold and ungrateful. Madison is struggling, and you're in a position to help. Why wouldn't you? When I finally managed to respond, I kept it short. I worked hard to get where I am. No one handed me anything. When I was struggling, no one, not Madison, not you, helped me. Silence. Then the dramatic sniffle. I knew the tears were coming. She started the whole, "How did we raise someone so selfish?" speech. My dad chimed in, saying success had changed me, made me forget where I came from. I didn't argue. I just told them that if they were so worried about Madison, they could help her themselves. That shut them up fast. Madison must have realized bringing in our parents wouldn't work, because her next move was direct. She started messaging me constantly. Some texts played the pity card, others tried to remind me of childhood memories. Remember when we used to stay up late watching movies? Or, I miss when you used to follow me around like my little shadow. Then came the guilt trips. I thought we were past all that stupid high school drama. We're older now. We should support each other. I told her I was willing to give her advice, but I wasn't handing her a job or introducing her to my connections. If she was serious, she needed to do the work herself. That's when the mask slipped. The sweet, nostalgic messages turned bitter. She accused me of enjoying watching her struggle, acting like I was better than her. She threw in that my success was mostly luck and that I should remember where I came from. I didn't bother responding. That night, I vented to my friends. Every single one of them said the same thing. Why was I even giving Madison the time of day after everything she had done? The next day, I found out from a mutual acquaintance that Madison had been trying to find jobs but kept turning down entry-level roles because she thought they were beneath her. She expected to land something big without the qualifications to back it up. It explained a lot. Madison didn't want a job. She wanted a shortcut. Then came the financial hints. She casually mentioned that her soon-to-be ex-husband had stopped paying for her apartment, that things were tight, that she wasn't sure how she'd make it through the next few months. I tested the waters. I sent her links to free online courses to build her skills. I even suggested some entry-level jobs. She brushed it off. She didn't have time for that. She needed something immediate. That's when it became clear. Madison didn't want help. She wanted me to fix everything for her. When I didn't, she did what she always did, took it to social media. That afternoon, a vague post appeared on her page. Something about fake family and how some people forget where they came from when they get a little success. It was generic enough to deny, but obvious enough that everyone knew it was about me. I didn't let it slide. I messaged her directly. If you have something to say it to my face. She read it immediately. No response. The next morning, my parents called again. This time, they weren't pretending to be disappointed. They were outright angry. They had seen Madison's post and, instead of questioning her, immediately blamed me. You're ruining the family dynamic, Ashley. You're driving a wedge between siblings. They didn't care about what actually happened, only that Madison was upset. That was my breaking point. I told them I was done. If Madison wanted real advice, I was there, but I wasn't going to be manipulated, guilt-tripped, or have my history rewritten. They could be mad all they wanted, but I wasn't playing this game anymore. Silence lasted for 3 weeks. No texts, no calls. It was quiet, but I knew it wasn't over. Madison wasn't the type to let things go. She was just recalculating. The first sign came through my parents. Their tone changed, not pushing, but their conversations were laced with comments like, "Family should stick together," And success doesn't mean much if you don't have loved ones to share it with. They never said Madison's name, but the message was clear. Then a major career opportunity came my way. A well-known company reached out with an offer that could take my career to the next level. It was the kind of opportunity people worked years for. I was excited and, for once, shared the news publicly. The reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Congratulatory messages from friends and colleagues. But buried in those messages was a warning from a mutual acquaintance. Madison saw your post. She's pissed. Apparently, that's the exact type of job she's been trying to land. Within days, the smear campaign started. Whispers through mutual connections that I had become stuck up, that I looked down on people less successful, that I had abandoned my family once I made it big. It escalated fast. I heard from someone in my industry that Madison was telling people I was ruthless, that I stepped on others to get ahead. She wasn't just trash-talking. She was trying to damage my reputation. I debated confronting her, but I knew how Madison worked. She'd deny everything, play innocent, act like it was all a misunderstanding. Then something happened that I couldn't ignore. A company I had been in talks with suddenly stopped responding. No explanation, just silence. I reached out through my network to find out what happened. The answer was worse than I expected. Madison had contacted them. She tried leveraging old connections, introducing herself as my sister, and implied that I was untrustworthy. She didn't outright lie, but planted enough doubt to make them hesitate. She knew exactly what she was doing. She couldn't destroy my career, but she could stain my reputation. That was it. I contacted my professional connections, cleared up any doubts, and made sure Madison's interference was shut down. Then I messaged her directly. I know what you did. It ends now. She denied everything at first, acted shocked, pretended she had no idea what I was talking about. When that didn't work, she switched tactics. She admitted she had vented, but claimed she never meant for it to get back to me. She said she was just frustrated and going through a hard time. I didn't care. I told her she had officially burned all bridges. And, like clockwork, my parents called. Not to ask what happened, but to blame me for making things worse. Madison was struggling. She was in pain. I should understand. I made it clear I was done being the scapegoat. Madison's actions had consequences, and she could deal with them herself. That should have been the end of it, but then one night, I got a message from Madison. It was long, emotional, and completely unexpected. She said she knew she had messed up, admitted that jealousy had gotten the best of her, and claimed she didn't want to be like this anymore. She begged for another chance. I stared at the message for a long time. Maybe she meant it. Maybe she didn't. But I wasn't going to take her word for it. If she wanted a second chance, she was going to have to prove it. Something about her message didn't sit right with me. It felt too polished, too rehearsed, like she had copied it from How to Apologize guide online. There were no specifics, no real accountability. She didn't mention the lies she spread, the damage she tried to do to my career, or any of the times she humiliated me. Just a vague, I made mistakes with no acknowledgement of what those mistakes actually were. I showed it to my friends, and they all had the same reaction. It didn't sound like Madison at all. It sounded like someone trying to say exactly what I wanted to hear. Then, right on cue, my parents started acting strange. The same people who had called me selfish and cold were suddenly being supportive and understanding. They said they just wanted what was best for both of us and hoped I could find it in my heart to give Madison another chance. It was obvious she had already gone to them, spinning her apology as proof that she had changed, and now they were doing their part to pressure me. I finally responded to Madison with one condition. If she was serious, she had to take full accountability. She had to acknowledge everything she had done, apologize to the people she had lied to, and actually show she was willing to change. That's when the cracks started to show. She immediately backtracked. She said she didn't think she needed to grovel, and that I should just accept her apology and move on because that's what family does. She acted hurt, saying she had finally swallowed her pride to reach out, and I was making it impossible for her to fix things. Then, less than 2 hours later, she dropped the real reason she had reached out. She needed help finding a job. She thought since I was doing so well, maybe I could put in a good word for her somewhere, just a simple recommendation. Nothing too big. Everything clicked into place. This wasn't about making things right or fixing our relationship. She had run out of options, and I was her last resort. That was my breaking point. I told her flat out that I wasn't helping her. If she wanted forgiveness, she had to prove she deserved it. If she wanted a job, she had to earn it herself. The second she realized I wasn't budging, the tantrum started. She called me selfish, accused me of hoarding opportunities like I had a secret pile of job offers, and was just refusing to share. She said I was acting like I was better than everyone else and had let success get to my head. When that didn't work, she cried. She sobbed about how hard life was for her, how much harder it had been for her than it ever was for me, painting herself as the victim in a story she created. I didn't fall for it, but she knew someone who would. The moment I shut her down, my phone rang. My mom, Madison, had already called them, feeding them a new story about how I was purposely keeping her unemployed and making her life harder out of spite. Of course, my parents believed her. They accused me of holding a grudge and being cruel. But underneath all the guilt-tripping, I caught something else: frustration. It wasn't just about me refusing to help Madison. It was about them realizing too late that their favoritism had left her completely unprepared for real life. I told them the truth. Madison didn't want help. She wanted shortcuts. She wanted me to fix the mess she created without actually doing anything to fix herself. Then came their final move. If you refuse to help your own sister, then maybe we should go no contact, they said, thinking it was a threat. They thought it would scare me into submission. Instead, I called their bluff. Okay, I said. Silence. Then a panicked backpedal. They didn't want to cut me off, of course. They just didn't want to see the family torn apart. I hung up. The next few days were eerily quiet. No messages from Madison. No calls from my parents. Nothing. But I knew Madison. This wasn't over. She was just figuring out her next move. A week passed before the messages started coming in, but this time, they weren't from her. Industry friends, colleagues, even distant acquaintances started reaching out, all asking the same question. So, you and Madison made up? That was my first red flag. The second came when I asked them why they thought that. Madison had been contacting them. She wasn't just reaching out. She was name-dropping me, making it seem like we had reconnected and patched things up. In the spirit of sisterly bonding, she just needed a little help, a job lead, an introduction, maybe even a foot in the door at their companies. She wasn't just lying. She was using my reputation to get ahead. I immediately started damage control. I reached out to my network, not to blacklist Madison, but to clarify that she wasn't affiliated with me. Some had already been wary of her, sensing something was off in her behavior, and my warning only confirmed their suspicions. The reactions were almost identical: shock, then discomfort. One person, more blunt than the others, just asked outright, "So, you guys aren't actually close?" "Not even remotely," I replied. That's when the real fallout started. People she reached out to began distancing themselves. Some stopped responding to her altogether. A few, realizing the full extent of her manipulation, straight up blocked her. She must have realized something was wrong because suddenly, she was in full damage control mode. She started messaging people again, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. She said she thought I was okay with it, that she had just been optimistic about us reconnecting. But by then, it was too late. Her name was already being passed around in the worst possible way. Instead of making connections, she burned even more bridges. The inevitable happened. The moment Madison realized I had shut down her latest scheme, my parents got involved again. This time, they weren't pretending to be concerned. They were furious. "You've ruined Madison's chances," they said. "You humiliated her in front of people who could have helped her." According to them, she was on the verge of losing everything, and it was all because I refused to help. Not once did they question why she had been reaching out behind my back. Not once did they acknowledge that she was lying to people to get ahead. It wasn't about what Madison had done. It was about how I had reacted. That was when Madison sent me one final message. She didn't even try to apologize this time. She accused me of wanting her to fail, of still holding on to bitterness from the past. She said I enjoyed watching her struggle, called me cruel and selfish, and said that deep down, I had always hated her. I didn't argue. I didn't explain myself. I just told her the truth. Her situation was her own fault. If she had spent half as much time working on herself as she did trying to manipulate people, she wouldn't be in this mess. She called once, twice, 5 times, crying and begging me to talk to her. I blocked her. I blocked my parents. It didn't take long for Madison to make her next move. Less than a week after I blocked her and my parents, the social media post went up. It was long, dramatic, and vague enough to be denied if questioned, but clear enough for anyone paying attention to know exactly who she was talking about. She painted herself as the struggling sister, abandoned and betrayed by her own family. She talked about how she had always supported her loved ones, but now that I was successful, I had completely shut her out. She made sure to mention that she was barely scraping by while I was living comfortably, ending the post with the classic guilt trip line. Funny how the people you love the most are the ones who hurt you the worst. Predictably, the comments were full of sympathy at first. People rushed to comfort her, telling her to stay strong and that real family always comes back. A few even suggested that she should reach out to me and try to mend things, completely unaware that she had already burned every bridge. But then something happened that Madison hadn't planned for. People started pushing back. At first, it was just a couple of small comments questioning her narrative. Someone asked why she was struggling so much if she had spent years bragging about her perfect life. Another pointed out that if I was really so heartless, why was I successful while Madison was floundering? Then old friends from high school chimed in. People who had seen firsthand how Madison treated me started calling her out. They reminded her of how she used to mock me in front of everyone, how she made fun of my weight, my clothes, and my social awkwardness. Someone even brought up the time she humiliated me at that wedding. Madison started deleting comments as fast as she could. The more people called her out, the faster she deleted. Anyone who questioned her version of events got blocked. But she couldn't erase everything. Screenshots started circulating. People shared their own experiences with her, talking about how entitled and cruel she had always been. Then the worst thing possible for Madison happened. Someone dug up an old post from years ago, one where she openly bragged about bullying me. It was right there, in her own words, a post from her college days where she laughed about how her awkward little sister tried to dress up for a family event and how she made a joke so brutal I looked like I wanted to disappear. The comments under it, filled with her friends laughing and encouraging her, hadn't aged well. It spread fast. People who had originally sympathized with her started changing their tone. The same people who comforted her were now asking why she had never mentioned any of this before. Madison panicked. She posted again, claiming she was being unfairly attacked. She said people were misinterpreting things and that she had just been a dumb kid back then. She played the victim harder than ever, talking about how people refused to let her grow and how she was just trying to make things right. But no one was buying it anymore. Her carefully curated reputation, the one she had spent her whole life building, was crumbling. Meanwhile, my parents were scrambling to do damage control. They started calling extended family, trying to rally support. They told everyone that Madison was in crisis and that I had been cold and unfeeling. But the problem was, they had spent years making excuses for Madison's behavior, and now that everything was coming to light, a lot of people weren't interested in hearing it anymore. The final message from Madison came late at night. A single text, "You've won. I hope you're happy." I stared at it for a long time. There was no satisfaction in it, no sense of victory. It had never been about winning. It had always been about finally being free. Madison disappeared after her smear campaign backfired. She went completely silent online. No posts, no passive-aggressive quotes, nothing. It was like she had vanished overnight. My parents went quiet too. No more guilt trips, no more angry calls. It was as if they had collectively decided to pretend none of it ever happened. Weeks passed with nothing. Then the whispers started. Mutual acquaintances, old classmates, people who still had some connection to Madison started hinting that something was going on. Nobody had seen her recently. There were rumors that she was in serious trouble, but no one had the full details. I ignored it at first. Then an old friend from high school messaged me. "Hey, I think Madison is homeless." That caught my attention. I asked how they knew, and they explained that someone from Madison's old friend group had mentioned it. Her apartment lease had been terminated, and she had nowhere to go. I wanted confirmation, so I reached out to someone I trusted, someone who had been in Madison's circle but wasn't blindly loyal to her. They confirmed everything. Madison had been evicted. She had been couch surfing for weeks, bouncing between friends' places, but her options were running out. Most people had distanced themselves after her online meltdown, and the ones who hadn't were either fed up with her behavior or couldn't afford to help. The biggest shock was finding out that my parents had known the entire time. They hadn't said a word to me. Maybe they really believed that withholding help would finally push Madison to take responsibility, or maybe they were just tired after years of covering for her and saw me as the last option left. Then, out of nowhere, Madison texted me. A casual message with no mention of the past. "Hey, how have you been?" Like nothing had happened. I didn't play along. I responded bluntly, "If you're looking for a place to stay, I'm not your solution." She backpedaled immediately, insisting she wasn't asking for anything, that she just wanted to talk, that she had been thinking a lot and wanted to reconnect. I wasn't interested in playing games, so I pushed. I asked outright what was going on. That's when the truth finally came out. She admitted she had been evicted and had nowhere stable to go. She had asked our parents for help, and they refused. They told her she needed to learn responsibility, though I suspected the real reason was that they couldn't afford to bail her out anymore. Their patience had finally worn thin after years of making excuses for her, and with no one left to take on the burden, they conveniently decided it was time for tough love. I confronted them. I asked why, after everything, they expected me to take care of Madison when they wouldn't even let her sleep on their couch. Their excuse was pathetic. They claimed they were doing it for her own good, that if they helped her now, she'd never learn to stand on her own. But apparently, I was still supposed to be the one to step in because I had the means. I was done with the hypocrisy. I told them Madison wasn't my responsibility. She had made her choices, burned every bridge, and pushed away every person who could have helped her. Now she was facing the consequences. When I relayed that message to Madison, she didn't argue for the first time. She didn't lash out or play the victim. She just sat with it. And then she said something I never expected. "I don't know what to do." There was no manipulation in her voice, no fake tears, just exhaustion. And then she asked, "How did you fix your life?" Not, "Can you fix mine?" Not, "Can you help me?" Just that. A week after our last conversation, Madison sent another message. This time, it felt different. It wasn't filled with excuses or blame. It was a long, unprompted apology where she actually owned up to everything. She admitted to the bullying, the lies, the way she treated me growing up. She said she had spent her entire life coasting, believing things would always work out for her because they always had. And now that they weren't, she didn't know how to handle it. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't try to guilt-trip me. It was the most genuine thing I had ever heard from her. But I still didn't trust it. I had seen too many of Madison's apologies before, too many times where she said what she thought I wanted to hear, only for her actions to prove otherwise. So I made my stance clear. I wasn't giving her money, I wasn't offering contacts, and I wasn't going to bail her out. But if she actually wanted to change, I was willing to offer guidance. Her response came quickly. "Okay, I understand." No argument. No pushback. Just acceptance. I decided to test her. I recommended a book on personal accountability. Nothing complex, just a straightforward guide on taking responsibility for your own life. I told her to read it and check back with me if she was serious. Honestly, I expected her to ignore it. But a week later, she messaged again. She had read the book and wanted to talk about it. For the first time in years, we met in person. Madison looked different, not physically, but there was something about her energy. The usual arrogance, the constant need to be admired, was gone. We sat down, and for once, she didn't try to control the conversation. She admitted that she had spent her whole life believing that things would always go her way, that someone would always be there to fix her mistakes, whether it was our parents, her friends, or whatever guy she was dating at the time. She had never actually learned how to stand on her own. Then she said something I never thought I'd hear. "I was awful to you." She didn't say it like she expected forgiveness. She said it like a fact. And for the first time, I believed she actually understood it. But an apology wasn't enough. I told her that trust wasn't something she could just ask for. It had to be rebuilt, and it would take time. She didn't argue. I gave her another challenge, signing up for a free online course in a field she was interested in. If she really wanted to change, She needed to start somewhere. She agreed. A week later, she followed through. She sent proof that she had completed the first module. She asked questions about how to stay motivated and admitted that learning something new was harder than she expected, but she wanted to keep going. Then our parents found out. Suddenly, they were back, pretending to be supportive and talking about how proud they were of Madison for trying to better herself. And then, right on cue, they asked why I couldn't just help her financially now that she was making an effort. She's finally doing the work, they said. Isn't it time you stepped up? I shut that down immediately. If Madison was really changing, she had to do it on her own. No shortcuts. No handouts. No easy way out. And for once, Madison didn't argue with that. She just kept going. Months passed, and for the first time in her life, Madison actually stuck to something. She kept going with the online courses. It was slow at first, but she didn't quit. She started applying for jobs. Real jobs, not just trying to skip steps by leveraging connections she didn't have anymore. And for once, she didn't expect me to do the work for her. Then something shocking happened. Madison landed a job. It wasn't glamorous, not something she could brag about, just a basic entry-level position in a stable industry. A place where she could finally start rebuilding. She didn't run to me expecting praise. She just quietly told me, almost as if she wasn't sure I'd care. I wasn't going to pretend everything was suddenly fine between us, but I acknowledged that she was trying. I still kept my distance. The past wasn't something that could just be erased, and I wasn't going to let her back into my life just because she had taken a few steps in the right direction. But she didn't push. For once, she didn't demand immediate forgiveness. Our parents, of course, didn't see it that way. To them, Madison getting a job meant everything should go back to how it was. They started up again, telling me it was time to let go of the past, that family is more important than old grudges. They treated Madison's improvement as if it wiped away everything she had done before. I didn't budge. Madison was making progress, but that didn't mean I had to pretend none of it had happened. Surprisingly, for the first time, Madison didn't join in on the pressure. She admitted she understood why I still kept my distance. That was the turning point. One day, completely unprompted, Madison told me she was actually glad I hadn't enabled her. If you had bailed me out, she said, I never would have changed. It was the first real conversation we had ever had as adults without bitterness hanging over it. But there was no magical happy ending. We weren't suddenly best friends. The past still existed, and I wasn't going to rewrite history just because she had finally started to fix herself. Our parents still wouldn't learn. They continued making excuses for her past behavior, acting like she had just been lost and that I had been too harsh. But for once, I didn't have to push back alone. Madison actually told them to stop. She told them she wanted to figure things out herself and didn't want them interfering. It shocked me. For the first time, she was setting her own boundaries with them. She also admitted something else. She had burned too many bridges in her industry. Her old connections weren't willing to work with her, and she would have to start fresh somewhere else. She didn't blame me. She didn't make excuses. She just accepted it. The best part? She never tried to manipulate me again. No guilt trips. No emotional blackmail. She had finally learned that I wasn't someone she could control anymore. The last time we met, she looked at me seriously and said, I don't expect us to be close, but I want you to know I respect you now. And that was enough. I never wanted revenge. I never wanted Madison to suffer. I just wanted to be free. And now, for the first time in my life, I was. We aren't close and probably never will be, but we can finally coexist without all the toxicity. Honestly, that's more than I ever thought was possible.